Fiction usually depicts medieval Europe as a place where only white people exist, such as the recent movie called The Northman, a fantastically brutal and gritty masterpiece set in Scandinavia. While its setup is highly realistic and faithful to history, it also digs deep into myths and legends, often pulling us into something magical or psychedelic, somewhere in between reality, so the viewer can be left confused. Should we take it seriously or not? That's my take on the movie. It's great either way, and you should watch it. Another thing that is usually taken too seriously is race, especially when it comes to movies that are supposedly meant to be faithful to history. In the case of The Northman, some have pointed out that there are no black or dark-skinned people depicted in the movie's cast. Ignoring how much of a hot potato issue this is, I was intrigued by the implied question. Were there many people of mixed race in Scandinavia and Northern Europe? And were there black Vikings? It's an idea that doesn't seem too far-fetched to the creators of the show Vikings. While the early medieval world certainly wasn't massively diverse, especially before the turn of the millennium, we probably greatly underestimate how globalized it already was. And this is especially true for the Vikings, who were some of the most prolific traders, explorers, and enslavers of people. This is a salmonid silver coin. Many just like this one could be found in Scandinavia and Britain. The Samanid Empire saw the creation of a Persianite culture. How did their coin end up in Europe? Through rivers and seas, with other goods such as silver, slaves, furs, wood, and textiles. Indeed, the Norse world formed one giant system from the North Sea, connecting Iceland, Greenland, the British Isles, and the Low Countries to as far as India, Western Asia, Byzantium, and Mesopotamia. The movement of goods and people has also been documented in literary sources such as that of Ibn Fadlan, an Arabic traveler who wrote accounts of the people that he encountered in what is today southern Russia and Ukraine. His account is most notable for providing a detailed description of the Volga Vikings, including eyewitness accounts of the people, of life as part of a trade caravan, and witnessing a ship burial. Not every Islamic trader's journey was as well documented as Fadlan's, but it's quite likely that there were Arab merchants moving along the same routes, as well as Norsemen, Greeks, Armenians, Georgians, Romans, and others. This turned places like Eastern Europe into relatively fertile areas for new communities to arise. People such as the Rus, Bulgars were exposed to trade and ideas coming from both directions of this trade system, and the mixture of Greek, Norse, and Arabic culture that popped up along the way between these trading hubs. The other great mover of people in the medieval world was the church. In particular, the ties between the Rus and Byzantine were religiously informed, as well as tied to practical trade arrangements and political situations. Missionaries like Saint Cyril and Methodius had moved around what is today Ukraine and Russia, attempting to convert the natives to Christianity, and eventually the conversion took hold due to a confluence of political necessity as well as medieval power politics, and the Rus were brought into the orbit of the Christian Orthodox Church. So culture and genetics of early Christian Europe was slowly disseminated by various missionaries and their followers. But for the most part, people of various races were taken to Scandinavia as slaves. Scholars have long wondered why the Vikings suddenly emerged as a formidable raiding force, starting with their attack on the Christian monastery of Lindisfarne, located on the northeast coast of England in 793. The answer might have been a need for foreign slave labor to help build their enormous fleets of ships and produce the textiles for their sails. After all, where did all these ships come from, and how did they feed all of their raiding parties, if they were all out raiding? Historical accounts make it clear that when the Vikings raided coastal towns from the British Isles to the Iberian Peninsula, the Vikings took thousands of men, women, and children captive and held or sold them as slaves. As a result, slaves may have comprised as much as 10% of the population of Viking-era Scandinavia. The desire for slaves might have been one of the main reasons Vikings began raiding in the first place. The Annals of Ulster described a Viking raid near Dublin in 821, in which they carried off a great number of women into captivity, one of the earliest references to the Vikings as slave masters. Other sources emerged from the Arab world as well, law, such as Ibn Hakwal in 977, when he wrote that Viking slave trade extended across the Mediterranean from Spain to Egypt. The Vikings took slaves from other places in Europe and forced them to work for them, to build their raiding fleets and to farm their lands. Gwyn Jones, in A History of the Vikings, wrote that the labor force of a substantial freeman's farm seemed normally to have included some half-dozen slaves. Slave labor was most advantageous in the heavy and exacting work of clearing and tilling new land. To sum it all up, while the first generations of Vikings were probably indeed all white, with each passing century it is likely that more and more diversity assimilated into their ranks, meaning that it was entirely inevitable that there were mixed race and various African people in Scandinavia and Northern Europe at the turn of the century, especially after the Viking raiding and trading networks expanded as far as the Mediterranean. However, whether those same people were able to integrate into Viking society and go on raids with them or own lands is a bit of a stretch. It was possible, but not probable, and we don't have any evidence either way. So does this make me not like the Northman? No way. We need way more movies like this. Movies that make us ask questions and make us curious and challenge our assumptions. Now, if you're interested in more facts, as well as wild speculation about the Vikings, then check out my Berserker video. Click up there. This is my Patreon map. Add yourself by becoming a sponsor of my show. Sign up for my Patreon or drop me a message and some Bitcoin. It really goes a long way. I also make maps and other stuff, so head on over to geoperspective.org to see some of my merch. Now, have a guess where this footage was taken, and I'll see you soon. Geoperspective out.